How you doing, guys? Welcome to the Fit for 90 podcast. I am your host, Cayman Bandel, non-league footballer and strength and conditioning coach. Today, I am really excited. I'm joined by a very special guest, Archie Watts, which I'm convinced that most of you listen to this probably follow him on Instagram. He's got a great following. He puts out some great content. Today, we're going to be crossing over two different worlds of athletic development. Archie works with high school athletes out in the US. He helps them to build speed, strength, power to get ready for college sport. And on paper, it sounds quite different to what I do, but when you actually kind of strip it back, I think we're solving a very similar problem, helping athletes to perform under pressure, building better athletes, helping them to move better, to produce power and sustain performance. So I kind of wanted to break down today what Archie's seeing on his side and more importantly, what you guys listening can take from it. So first of all, Archie, welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Could you just give us like a little background really into like how you ended up working in the US and who you work with specifically, as I mentioned, with high school athletes?
Yeah, so I actually grew up in England, grew up in Bristol, came through the academy system from 12 to 16. Never got a contract for a scholar, so ended up playing in college in England while playing some semi-pro football. And then around like 17, 18, I started having the idea that I wanted to go out and explore the opportunities out in the US. I was kind of really interested by the opportunity to continue my education and carry on playing, training every day, great facilities. So that's originally what got me interested. Eventually made the move out at 19 during COVID, which was a little bit chaotic, but eventually got settled in there and ended up playing 6 years of college soccer. Oh. And throughout that time, I've always been kind of passionate about the strength and conditioning side and continue to just learn and educate myself and apply that to my game. And around 3-4 years ago, then started taking that into other athletes. And I've worked with a wide variety of athletes across that time, but really enjoyed niching down and focusing on the high school soccer player now.
Amazing. Just coming back to you said you moved like was it during COVID or just a year before COVID was?
Yeah, it's during COVID. So I made my commitment. Yeah, I made my commitment to go out in the summer of 2020. And so I'd signed all the papers, all the documents, and then all of the stuff with COVID's going on. We've like signed a lease on a house and everything. And then I had no idea if we could get out there. But I ended up getting out there when I was meant to. The way it works in the US, you have like they call it the full season. Yep. So from like September to November, that ended up getting cancelled and pushed back to the spring. So it was definitely I didn't know it at the time, but it was a completely different experience that I had in my first year there compared to what I ended up having in the next few years I was there.
Yeah, I think for a lot of kind of our generation, that's up until now, it's been once in a lifetime, isn't it? We've never experienced that before, that level of kind of restriction. How did you manage to stay fit and train during that time? Because I work with a lot of non-league lads, and even today, like I was 26 now, and I still speak to lads, and they're like, during COVID, I just lost all my fitness and I couldn't get back on the track. Like, how did you manage to stay fit during that time? Or did you struggle as well as some other players did?
I got pretty lucky. So where I was living at the time, had access to some free weights, was able to kind of get out in the street, do my plyos, do my sprints. Nice. And we got given our summer program from the college. So as I'm sure a lot of people are aware, like out in the US, strength and conditioning is taken very seriously from an athletic development point of things. Yeah. So we got given that summer packet. In my head at the time, I'm like, oh, everyone's going to do this. And I was probably one of like 5 people that actually did the packet. But in terms of like my fitness going into that season was incredible. Brilliant. Even though we didn't actually have a season to go into, which was a shame because I was actually in great shape coming out of COVID. Definitely like in terms of actual ability on the ball, not where it needed to be because that was harder to carry on training on my own. I did my best, but it's not the same. So, but in terms of the fitness, I was in a pretty good place going out there.
Brilliant. And I think that's one thing I think you mentioned about like you're one of very few people who did the work. I see it a lot where it's like there's a lag effect on these things. Like the work we do now compounds in 8 to 12 weeks time, which I wish it was sooner, but unfortunately with performance and fitness and anything in the fitness world, with anything really, it takes time to build, doesn't it? Anything worth really having. So no, it's a good little lesson to take there. In terms of, you mentioned about like the strength and conditioning side of things out in America, they're very, very heavy and very serious about it. What's the biggest difference you've seen between US athlete development and maybe what you've seen in the UK?
I think there's an emphasis on it from a younger age. So in high school, even outside of the club, you're getting to lift as part of like a high school program and you're getting a lot of work in there. You're going to get a lot of people that are actually dedicating time to training, actually in the gym, out on the field, working with strength and conditioning coaches
Yeah.
is a lot more common here than I'd say what it is back in England. I think there's just more of an emphasis on it in the game as well. I think that the transition that people experience coming from England or anywhere else in Europe or even around the world coming out to the US is how different the style of football is here and how you'll get guys that are really performing well at a Division One level that are technically nowhere near the ability of, say, an English player coming over. But just the demands of the game, especially in certain positions, like if you're a fullback, there's so much emphasis on the physical side. And equally, you
Yeah.
get a lot of guys that are struggling coming over here who are technically some of the best players and they're not even touching the pitch just because
Yeah.
they're not suited or fit or willing to adapt their game to how the style of football is over here.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I've had a lot of non-league lads who played non-league here who then went over to America to play there. And the biggest thing, a lot of lads who join the program, they come into the program because they're heading out to America and they're like, I need to get to that level of fitness. And the first couple of players I had in the program, I was like, I didn't quite understand the levels needed. And then as I started to research more and kind of look more into it and then train these guys as they went out there, I looked at the demands and it is head and shoulders above everyone else. Whilst the technical side, there might be better technical players around the world. The physical side of the game in America, I think, is massive. Is there something you like? Is there a reason you think younger athletes develop more so physically? Because that's what I kind of know is like younger players compared to younger lads here, they're definitely more developed physically. Have you noticed that as well?
Yeah, I think it's almost a carryover from other sports that are popular in the US. There's
Yeah.
such a big demand. Like, say you're playing American football, you're playing
Yes.
baseball, you're playing lacrosse, which is pretty popular out on the East
Yeah.
Coast here. There's a lot of demand there for like the physical side of the game. And I think that almost focusing on developing there and playing multiple sports as well, which I think's maybe a little bit more common in the US, is kind of driving that development. And even if you weren't to, say, train in the gym, if you were to just purely train for American football, you're getting so many more kind of exposures to accelerations, to top speed
Yes.
sprints, to collisions as
Yeah.
you would playing football. And I think that, again, playing football in England, there's a lot of emphasis on technical development. And even more so, even if you're comparing like England to Europe, you're even ahead of probably the rest of Europe in terms of physical development in England.
Yeah.
So I think the players that kind of see that gap going from England to America almost have it easier than the guys that are coming from, say, Spain to play out in America.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I mentioned. I mean, every time I'm recording this in England is the off season. I say to my players a lot, I say cross training can be a really useful tool to get exposure to different qualities. Because if we're just constantly playing football all the time, all year round, you don't really get those different exposures and you kind of limit yourself in a way. So do you think having that exposure to different sports is one of the reasons why they are more physically developed and more athletic in a sense?
I think so. Yeah, there's kind of two sides to it. There is that really good side of the athletic development. There's also a big problem in the US of the financial side of development in terms of there's a lot of emphasis on paying for tournaments, traveling around the US at like
Wow.
crazy ages of like 14, 15. You're traveling 5 hours across the country to go and play in California. And there is that side of it, which I don't want to speak only of the positives in terms of the cross training effect that is pretty positive because you do have that negative side effect of that part of it. But again, like going back to what you're saying about the off season, now is a great time, especially in the early off season at the time of us recording this, of where cross training is a great way to kind of build up general athletic qualities before maybe someone starts focusing on areas of weaknesses or areas they want to develop going into the coming season.
Absolutely. Do you have any kind of other sports that you play? Mine's always been this time of year is kind of tennis, and I find like playing a lot of tennis helps me with my change of direction and my agility. And I don't even think about training it; it's just the nature of the sport and the exposures I'm getting. Do you have any other sports that you enjoy?
I enjoy a wide range. I don't really have one that I go to. I find that anything I go into, I end up getting too competitive and just trying to become great at that.
Excellent.
So I try and stay away from becoming too competitive and just be like, if you
Yeah,
go and play tennis, just go and enjoy playing tennis.
yeah. I hear that.
But I sometimes say like strength and conditioning is the adult version of like multi-sports as
Yeah.
a kid, in terms of it's such an easy way to get a wide variety of different like training stimulus in.
Yeah.
Since I finished playing college soccer, I've got into like the kind of hybrid training space a little bit more, doing some longer distance running, which I don't necessarily recommend for footballers, but it's given me a good idea of balancing different types of training there.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's excellent. In terms of like the athletes you work with, what's the habits or the standards that are maybe just normal over there, but we don't necessarily have here? Because I feel like there's that level of athleticism and that level of commitment. It comes down to your habits and the standards you have as an individual athlete and also as a coach as well. Like, what's the differences between here and America?
To some extent, it's the belief of how much improving your athletic development is going to impact your game. I think that people
Right.
being slightly more aware of the need and the fact that when college soccer coaches are recruiting, they are going to be interested in how you're doing physically, because another big change that there has been in the US is the addition of, they call it the transfer portal, which is essentially
Right.
people can move between colleges. So
Yep.
in the past, it would be you'd come into one college and for the most part, everyone stayed at their college. Whereas now with the transfer portal, it's becoming more rare for Division One, like top Division One coaches to recruit kids straight out of high school. And instead they're taking transfers or players from abroad that are 20, 21, 22 years old. So
Oh,
I
wow.
think that even now there's even more emphasis on these kids to be physically ready to compete when they get up to the college level. So I think that just that belief and the understanding that it is going to have a big impact in the game and coaches are going to care a lot about it. I'd say probably going back to using England as the example, maybe having a little bit less belief that that's really what's going to impact your game and
Yeah.
placing the focus elsewhere.
Do you think that belief comes from, it has an element of that comes from the player, but do you think it has to come from external factors like a coach, parents, especially for younger athletes, in terms of the belief you're talking about? Like, does that come from external influences or is that purely from the athlete themselves when you talk about that belief?
I think it starts as external, of course, and then gradually like bleeds into the athlete. I think even from the level of the parents are often quite keen to help their child develop athletically as well. And I think there's a big culture in terms of investment in the US where people really value investing in like education, in coaching. There's a culture of putting more money into good coaches to help. I think because you've got to remember that there's a huge financial benefit for the parents if their kids get into play college soccer, because you're looking
Right.
at potentially $60,000 to $70,000 a year that you're saving on college tuition.
Yeah.
So you've got that huge push there as well. So I think, like you said, there's a lot of external factors that are going into the push on the athlete, and then also the athlete themselves seeing what they need to do to get up to that next level.
Do you find that players that are kind of being pushed to that level, have you seen in terms of their mentality and the mental pressure that comes from that level of commitment, have you seen them kind of handle that pressure well, or has that been detrimental to their performance purely from a kind of psychological standpoint?
I'd say there's almost less pressure in the US than in the UK. I think that coming through the academy system in the UK, and even like on my podcast now, speaking to guys that have come through that system, got released and come out to the US. Even when you speak to them now, you hear the pain in their voice when they talk about getting released at 12, not getting a professional contract at 18, having to find a new club at 16. There's so much pressure and like pain that goes into that experience. And I think that in the US, it's a little bit less pressure on the athlete in terms of, in England, football's your whole life. You know, that's, at least for me growing up, that's all I focused on. All I cared about was football. And I think that in the US, there's maybe a little bit more balance across different areas of life, or even different sports in general, where the culture's not so focused on that's the only thing that you can do or focus on.
Wow, that's really interesting. I would never have thought that. I would have thought it would be more pressure out in America. And I think you're definitely right in terms of, I speak to a lot of lads here who have been in the pro game and then they've had to drop down. And the ones that have dropped down, it's almost like they're kind of left to their own devices. I don't think maybe we do enough in this country to help those players. I know there's some steps being taken, but I still think there's a lot of progress to be made with that. Is there a system in America where if players don't get to the level they want to be at, is there something that they can fall back on, or is it that culture you've spoken about? Like there's not that much pressure on making it. It's more about having not all your eggs in one basket, so to speak.
Yeah, I think there's probably less of a catch below the level. So if you're not playing professionally or in college, there's less opportunity to then build back up. I feel like at least in England with the non-league system, if you don't get your pro contract, you're going to be able to play at a step in the non-league system. And you have a pretty nice system there in terms of if you do well at your level, you're more than likely going to get a move the next season. And there's that kind of gradual stepping stone of progression. Whereas for me, I feel like if you're not playing either professionally or in college by the time you're 18, there's not really that pathway to continue building from it. Like even if we look a little further on to like myself now at 25, just finished playing college soccer, a little bit late compared to most players, but there's not really a true pathway now unless I was to get a pro contract in America where you can carry on playing. Whereas if I came back to England, I'd play non-league and have a path there. If I still wanted to and I performed well, I'd be able to step up. Whereas in America now, it feels like the system ends at that point. It's college and then that's kind of it unless you're playing professionally.
All right, okay. That's really interesting. I just want to touch a bit more on kind of the training side of things, a bit more on. We'll start with speed and power because it's such a big one and everyone wants to be fast and powerful on a football pitch. When you look at speed development, where do you think most athletes get it wrong when they're trying to develop speed?
I think for the most part, it's thinking that they're getting it just from training.
Yeah.
And I think when we look at developing like a true top speed, if you want to develop speed, you have to be sprinting fast. And in the typical setup that you're getting within training sessions, where you're primarily working in smaller spaces, you're working on specific passages of play, you're not typically working in an 11-a-side setting at full speed. And unless your coach is specifically designing your training sessions to include some area of top speed sprinting, it's pretty rare that you're going to get it in within a team training session. And then you're expected to go and sprint at top speeds at the weekend 3, 4, 5, maybe more times in a game. Yeah. And there's that imbalance of, yes, you're going to, of course, be able to maintain a little bit of your speed just by games, but you're also getting the balance of if you're not hitting top speed regularly throughout the training week in smaller, more controlled settings and doses, then there's a lot of demand on you as a footballer when it comes into the weekend. So I'd say the first step in terms of developing speed is working out how many true exposures you're getting to top speed. And if you're only playing one game a week, then can you find a time within the training week to hit top speed? And I think the second part of that there is it doesn't have to be a lot of volume. You know, you can, before your team training session, you can get 4, 5, 40-yard sprints in. And if you've done them at a true good quality and you're actually hitting top speed, that's enough dose to help you keep developing your speed moving forwards throughout the season, where potentially it's a little bit more challenging to get those sessions in.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really sound point, to be fair. So something we do within the program is getting players to do that before team training, because sometimes that's the only kind of window they have, especially with work and everything else going on. Another thing I often see is like, I don't know if you're the same, but players not resting long enough when they're doing speed work. Have you noticed that as well?
Yeah, I think it's that kind of typical mentality of just work harder, and for something to give me progress, it has to feel hard. And of course it works so well in so many areas, but sprinting is one of the times where it is like that, work smarter rather than work harder. And if you're not resting long enough between your sprints, your speed starts here and you're just going to drop and drop and drop. And again, as we said, once you're dropping away from top speeds, yes, maybe you're improving your conditioning, but it's probably not your limiting factor. Your speed is what you want to work on. And if you're not resting for long enough between those sprints, then you're not going to be making the progress you want. And I think the hard thing there is you feel physically ready to sprint again before you're like neurologically ready to sprint again. And you have to, it's one of those things where you have to time it in my opinion, have the distance, then go and hit top speed again.
Yeah, I see that often. Like the speed session very quickly can become a conditioning session sometimes. And it's just having that level of discipline, like you say, just being able to say, no, I just need to stick to the timings and go again when coach says, kind of thing. In terms of, this is a question I get a lot, like, and I see it a lot online as well. What role does strength play in speed? Because we often see the argument that is a player strong because they're fast or fast because they're strong. What's your take on that?
If you're going to generalize it, it's going to be someone strong because they're fast. It's not to say that strength doesn't play a role in speed, but I think that people think they're going to purely get faster by strength training. And it's going to work up to a certain extent, especially with the population of athletes that I'm primarily focused on in terms of youth athletes. Improving your strength is going to have a huge impact on your speed. But once you're getting up to, you're squatting, say, 1.5, 2 times your body weight, and you get good at something like that, and people just think, oh, I'm good at that. I enjoy squatting. I enjoy lifting. I'll keep doing that. And eventually that's what's going to make me faster. So I think it's realizing that the strength training can help support your speed development, but it's never going to replace true top speed sprint training in that sense.
Absolutely. I often find with more advanced athletes who are strong and they're hitting good numbers, for example, with their squat or with deadlifts or whatever lift it might be, it's then looking at, okay, like what's the next step to that? And a lot of lads don't know where to go from that. Me personally, like we try and focus a bit more on plyometrics and building kind of tendon stiffness and taking that kind of route with things. What would you recommend for players, if there's a more advanced player listening to this right now, who's already very, very strong, where would you maybe direct them to start with their training?
I think the first thing is, can we catch the biggest mover, which is the volume of sprints and the frequency of sprints you're getting in. Now, if you're using that example we said earlier of you're only sprinting in games, the easiest way you're going to make progress with your speed is adding in some specific sprints. And as we mentioned earlier, you can do that in 20 minutes before a team training session. And you don't have to go to a gym. You can just get to training early if that's possible, if you've got the space. Get those sprints in, and that's going to be the biggest mover in terms of your speed. Then if we start looking at what extra can you do on top of that, if you're already doing your strength training, then you've got that base covered. Plyometrics is going to be another great place to start, especially looking starting with some extensive variations, really focusing on the feet and the ankles and your interaction with the ground there, and then building that base up from there. And I think another type of plyometric that a lot of people are neglecting is they do all of their plyometrics in the gym, which typically end up being a load of box jump variations and stuff there. And I think a lot of people would have great results if they look towards some more locomotive plyometric variations and
absolutely
things where you've got repeat effort ground contacts, where you're going to build momentum, where you're going to maintain speed and faster ground contacts through that movement.
Absolutely. I think there's something that a lot of lads don't realize is there's a spectrum when it comes to plyometrics. Sometimes we focus very much on the force dominant end of the spectrum, which if you're a bit more of a beginner, is probably a good place to start. But as you become more advanced, you definitely want to try and take that route. Whereas you're actually going out and you're doing these locomotive plyos maybe before a speed session just to kind of fire things up. But it's a really good point that in terms of gym transfers, because everyone's really heavy on the gym work. Why do so many athletes get stronger in the gym, but they don't get faster on the field? And is it purely because they're not getting enough speed exposure? They're not going out and sprinting often enough? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think for the most part, from what I've seen, it's not too much gym. It's too little of the other stuff. And if you're someone that is limited on time, then maybe you do have to cut into that gym work and take it back onto the field, or include more plyometrics in there, or get out on the pitch and sprint more. And you're going to lose a little bit of gym time. But for the most part, I'd say it's just a lack of the other things. It's if you're only ever training heavy and slow, and especially if you're in the lower parts of the non-league system and you're only getting 2 team training sessions a week, you're leaving a lot on the table in terms of athletic development with plyometrics, isometrics, anything where you're moving pretty quickly as well. So I'd say that's probably where people are missing out the most.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit like the said principle, which some players are aware of, some aren't. But essentially, the exposures you get to a specific quality, the more you train that, the better you're going to get at that. A lot of players speak to me all the time. They're like, well, I want to get faster. It's like, how much are you sprinting throughout the week? And I'm like, well, I don't really do any speed work. I just play football. And that often is where the problem lies, because they're not getting those exposures.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing I do want to pull out of that as well is someone can quite easily go wrong taking what you've just said there, let's be specific. And your example is great of, can we get out and sprint? Can we do plyometrics? What someone has to be careful of is making their actual gym program and just trying to make that specific.
Yeah,
And I think that's where some people go wrong. And the posts that kind of drive me insane on social media is the stop training like a bodybuilder, start training like an athlete ones. And it's just someone doing a regressed variation of a movement and no longer loading something heavy, no longer developing strength, no longer building muscle mass. And we don't want to move too far in that direction. We want to use the gym to get the exposures that you can't get on the pitch, which
yeah,
is the maximal strength stuff. It is some stuff where you're going to be moving a little bit slower and
yeah.
building up some volume there. And you still want that in your training. You just want to train the two extremes, which is, can you get strong? Can you get fast?
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. We see it a lot. And I've said it in the past, but when we talk about that kind of bodybuilder type workouts, I think what a lot of lads don't realize is that the exercises, if you used to see an athlete in the gym and a bodybuilder in the gym, a lot of the exercises are quite similar, but it's more so in terms of like the gaps, where we plug in the gaps or what gaps we plug in throughout the season, for example. If you're not getting a lot of heavy strength exposures or you're not getting a lot of speed exposures, like we have to plug those gaps as an athlete, whereas bodybuilders don't really think of it from that angle. But in the gym environment, often it does look quite similar, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's why I really hate that kind of fear mongering side of the social media space with the gym movements, as if you're going to kind of do like sets of 8 to 12 reps and you're suddenly going to look like Arnold. Like, it's not going to happen. You'd still need that side in your training, especially if you're underdeveloped physically, or if you're a youth athlete, or you're stepping up to college, you're stepping into men's football for the first time. That's going to be huge parts of your development, and that's going to go a long way as well.
Absolutely. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see athletes make when it comes to training?
Are we talking in the gym or now on the pitch?
I'd say let's start within the gym and then we'll go into the pitch after, in the gym environment.
I'd say the first one is trying to optimize before they build up any type of base. I mean, that a lot of people let the perfection get in the way of actually just getting started.
Yeah.
And they're looking for the perfect exercise, the magic workout split, the best whatever you need to kind of make progress. And I think the more experience you have within strength and conditioning and time that you've spent in the gym, you go back to the same basic exercises over and over again for probably 80% of the development. And I think that a lot of people would go a long way by just committing to something. And you can buy a program off a coach, you can make one yourself, but just have a program and follow it. It doesn't matter whether, you've built it from ChatGPT. I really don't care. Just get a program and actually follow it. And from there, you can feel what works. You can see where you're making progress. You can see where you haven't. And if you just jump between workouts, you jump between programs, first off, you're not going to be developing the exercise that you're actually doing. And secondly, you have just so much less motivation to actually stick with that plan that you're doing.
Yeah, I think I'll call it brilliant basics within our program. And it is a case sometimes of sticking with the kind of the core exercises for a long period of time. And I think that's one thing with social media, which I don't really like. It's because there's so many different like programs and so many people putting out things that you have to chop and change your workouts and try this, try that. When actually it's just like, if you just strip all the bullshit away and you kind of get back to basics, it is really, really simple. It's just, there's so much noise in the fitness space and the football space in particular, the strength and conditioning space in particular.
Yeah,
but
and that's
a really
problem as
point.
well, is those exercises that you just mentioned, they're the ones that are going to go viral. They're the ones that people are going to see. If I say, all right, here are the 3 exercises you need to improve as an athlete, and I show you a back squat, a bench press, and a sprint, it's not going to be that exciting for you to watch. If I show you 3 exercises that you've never seen before, all unilateral based with some random positions and equipment, now you're going to be interested. Now you're going to go into the gym and that's the secret. That's what I was missing. And now I'm suddenly going to be this incredible athlete. And that just keeps pulling everyone away from just getting a program, sticking to it, do the work that's needed to actually develop physically.
Yeah, that's bang on. I think if anything taken from this today for those listening, it would be that. It's just stay consistent and keep it simple, stupid, as we always say, KISS. Just focus on the basics. In terms of programming and and structure. I just wanted to touch on this. I don't want to go too in depth on this because I know a lot of the lads listening to this, it might go over their head a little bit. But in terms of like structuring a week for your athletes, I'm a really big fan of the high-low approach. How do you approach a training week for an athlete, say in season?
I think it's so highly dependent on the athlete and what their workload looks like and what they're trying to achieve. So I think if I pull it back to just a very basic level, it's can we kind of look at the week in a few different blocks, which is you're going to have starting at your game is where I always like to start and going from there. So if you've played 90 minutes of an intense game, then of course your focus is first off recovery. If you don't get the minutes that perhaps other players are getting, you need to be doing the extra work right then, because otherwise you're losing time where you then have to start moving away from development and you have to preparing for the next game. And you can then be preparing for that next game and you get another 20 minutes. Well, you've now recovered the same as if you played 90. You've prepared as if you're going to play 90. You're leaving a lot of room for development on the table. So that's always the place that I like to start is let's make sure that we get a great stimulus on the Saturday, on the day that's meant to be your game day. And then we can get everyone on the same page moving from there. So then I like to look at the start of the week as once we've recovered. One day is normally what I'll take for recovery just to get the balance between long-term development and performance. If we get to the point in the season where, you're getting up to the end of the season and you're playing cup finals, you're playing games that are going to decide whether you win the league or get relegated, then we're going to take 2 days and we'll start making recovery a bit more of a priority. But especially if you're playing, say, non-league and you've got a 40-week season, you still need to find that right balance. So
Definitely.
Normally at the start of the week, we're going to do a little bit of the heavier, higher volume leg stuff, give us maximal time to recover throughout the week. Similar to, as you said, a little bit of the high-low methods can be a little bit more challenging with athletes that are training, say, multiple days a week or have changing schedule. But for the most part, I'll try and get the higher stuff at the start of the week, typically on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, wherever it works for the athlete. That's the day if you don't have a midweek game, I'm going to be asking you to go out and hit top speeds on one of those days to try and get a nice balance between your game and your other top speed exposure. And then leading into the game at the weekend, then the focus is going to be a little bit more on preparation. And I think where a lot of people go wrong with that is they're so worried about adding any type of work, any type of loads, that they're missing out on another 2 to 3 days of development, which when you look across the course of a season, it's going to be massive. So
it compounds, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is massive. So not being scared to work out there and train hard there, but finding the right ways to do it, whether that's you're going to get a little bit more upper body work that's going to have less overall fatigue and less effect on your ability to perform at the weekend. We're going to use some, maybe that is a time where we can use box jumps and we can still focus on the concentric part of power and force and take away the impact of the landing, take away the impact of the eccentric, the parts that's really going to cause fatigue. So just trying to find the right balance there to prime yourself going into game day. I think the thing that I hate is taking Friday off before a Saturday game. For me, I hated it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of athletes find a lot of benefit from getting a little bit of work in leading up to that game.
Yeah, absolutely. I've tried both ways where I used to rest on the Friday and just do some recovery work and then started implementing more primers in recent years. And the primers definitely help you on the Saturday, without a doubt. And a lot of our players have noticed the same thing. It was actually my next question is, are you a fan of gym primers? Obviously, it's dependent on the athlete and their workload through the week, but you seem to be a fan of it. How would you, for anyone listening, how would you put together a primer for a non-league lad?
I think you've got to be careful of course, as you said, the volume they've had throughout the week.
Yeah.
And, if you've had a very heavy training day on Thursday, then you're going to have to adjust it.
That's often the case, isn't it, with Thursday training? Yeah.
I mean, I know non-league is normally Tuesday, Thursday, and
that's right.
Those are your sessions. So, of course, being aware of that. But for the most part, for the primer, we want to keep the intensity pretty high, which I think surprises a lot of people, and just really drop the volume down to be really low, which I think most people do a pretty good job of. So within that, we'll typically focus on first just getting the body feel good by working through some mobility stuff, some yielding isometrics, and just movements where you're making your body just feel good. Maybe the stuff that's not going to have that, big difference to key performance indicators across the course of a season, but stuff that's going to have a big difference for, say, the next day in terms of how you feel. From there, I'll normally get into some concentric based, either call it plyometric work, or some speed, strength, power stuff, and just really focusing on the concentric. So just the production of the force in the initial phase, and then minimizing the eccentric or the landing as much as possible. So kind of similar examples to before, but can we land on, say, a box to reduce the impact? Can we do a trap bar deadlift and just drop it from the top? We don't have to kind of control it down. Can we do a box squat? So we're limiting range of motion and limiting fatigue. Anything within that realm of things is going to work pretty nicely. And then I'll normally throw a little bit of upper body stuff in there as well. Ideally stuff where we're staying off the feet, just to kind of any load there and minimize any soreness. So anything that I really like, a bench press, a pull up, stuff where we can keep the intensity pretty high, but we're just going to keep the volume low, similar to what we said before. And then the guys like to get their arms working on a front as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Do that as well if you want to. I'm not going to stop anyone from that.
Especially this time of year with the sun coming out. Nothing wrong with it, to be fair. We all like to look good. No, that's really insightful answer, actually, for anyone listening. I think, of course, it is dependent on the athlete, but I think primers can be quite beneficial for a lot of lads. Again, if you're training really intensely on a Thursday, then maybe it's not the best option. But again, it's just dependent on the athlete. But I personally have found some great results off of doing primers on a Friday, about 24 hours or so before a game. In terms of the athletes you've worked with, because you work with a lot of athletes as well, who actually improves from the ones that stays the same? Like, what separates those players? What do you think that is? Is it a physical thing? Is it a mindset? Is it a work ethic? What separates the ones who really go and push on to the ones that just stay the same for months and years on end?
Yeah, I think we've got to a point where information's so readily available to everyone that it's not that common that someone just has better information than you, and that's why they're getting better results. I think that it comes down to how can you implement it. And I think the thing that I found, and the people that get the best results aren't the ones that are going to give me a month of hard work and then disappear. It's the ones that are pretty realistic with their expectations in terms of how frequently they're going to be able to train, consistently they're going to be able to train. Or if an athlete says to me, look, I'm going to be realistic with my schedule, I can give you 2 30-minute days a week. I'll take that athlete any day over someone that's going to give me an hour a day for 6 days and then disappear and not train hard again. And I think that's probably one of the biggest mental barriers, is getting over the fact of it doesn't need to be 60 minutes every day, 3 times a week, whatever you want to call it, to make great progress. I think that even within my coaching, I find myself leading even more towards how can we get you more results off doing less work, because at the end of the day, your focus still needs to be on your sport. It needs to be on football. It needs to be on your technical development. Those are going to always be the biggest movers in terms of where you're going to take your playing career. So Definitely. It's how can I give you the most with you giving me the least of your time there?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think it's something that a lot of players, I think they think they need to be all or nothing. And I think sometimes just recognizing that you can have all the knowledge in the world, but I think really the implementation is the issue that we have a lot of the time. And also coming back to the point that you don't need to be like in the gym every single day, especially as a footballer, as an athlete. There's so many different like plates you're trying to balance, so to speak, that gym is just, and strength work is just one part of it, but there's so many different elements of the sport, and playing the sport itself is a massive one, especially if you really want to try and take your game to that next level. The technical side of the game is massive for especially for the non-league lads here, and I'm sure in America as well, but that's a really, really sound point. What have you kind of noticed about the US? You mentioned culture earlier. What have you noticed about the US training culture that surprised you the most as you kind of went out there? Because you've been through it yourself, and obviously now coaching athletes as well? What surprised you the most?
Probably just the level of the facilities that you get access to. I think that, to be honest, some of the actual football coaching at times can be questionable.
Oh, really?
Depending on where you are and who you work with. I know that there's been a lot of people that have had a lot of complaints about that across, like, knowing multiple people throughout
Oh,
multiple
wow.
states, multiple colleges. So
Yeah.
there's a big difference between, you're going to get some incredible coaches, you're going to get some not so great coaches. And
Yeah.
I think there's probably even more variation to what you'll find back in England, say. So that's something. But in terms of the facilities and the level of care that you have access to, you have everything you need, you could possibly want to develop. There's really no excuse that you can have as an athlete, as a player here, that you don't have something that's going to affect your development. Even if I look
Yeah.
up the road where I am now at New Haven, we've got multi-million-dollar facilities that are better than what you're going to find at some Premier League clubs.
Yeah.
There's no reason that you can complain or have any excuse as to why you're not developing. It's in your own hands. And there's a lot of people that throughout the colleges that I've been at, that people will go above and beyond to help you with your development, and you're covering all aspects of the game. It's not like in, say, some lower levels of non-league where you're going to have to figure everything out on yourself. You're going to have to find a strength coach if you want to, go over your game film. You're going to have to do that on your own. If you want to take care of your nutrition, you're going to find that out on your own. Here you've got everything. You've got your strength coach to help you with your development. You've got the nutritionist as part of the team that you can go have a one-to-one session with and ask questions with. You have the gym that you can go and train at. You've got access to the pitch anytime you want to go and train at. And I think that's probably one of the most enticing things for people looking at it as an experience is, everything that you get access to. And if you're willing to use that, then, like I said, there's no reason why you can't be successful here.
Yeah, it's an absolute dream. That the lads we work with who have gone out to America, I said that exact same thing. Like, you've got the environment there to be able to develop and be your absolute best compared to what you have here. And it's a really sound point. My next question was actually like, what's the biggest difference in attitude between a UK and a US athlete? But I think kind of what you just said there, that almost answers it in a way that if you're a player who's going out there, you're going out there with an intention to be the best, would you say? Or do you think some players maybe blur that line a little bit? They have their intention at the beginning and then maybe that line gets blurred as they kind of progress.
Yeah, I'd say it goes both ways. You've got that side that I just described where you have everything you want to get to the next level. Equally, you have some people that treat it as their retirement home. You've got all of these luxuries, you've got all of these facilities. You didn't make it pro in the country you came from, and you're going to enjoy the experience of being in the US. You're going to enjoy the ability to travel. You're going to enjoy the ability to go to the parties, and there's no reason that you can't do both. Like, I mean, it's important to find balance in whatever you're doing, and
Absolutely.
you do have to come out and make the most of everything that you have as part of the experience. And, if you want to come out here and treat it as your retirement home, there's nothing wrong with that. That's your prerogative. And as long as you're giving everything to the team when you're at training, when you're in games, you're being a good teammate, then that's on the individual. But I think that you've got both sides, and that can also change, over the course of someone's career here. They can come out with the dream of, and I go and play pro, and maybe you realize that the level is a little bit higher than you thought. The competition's a little bit better than you thought. You've been competing against people in your county for your whole life, and you come out here and suddenly you're playing against kids that have played in Barcelona's academy, So it can go both ways. So yeah, there's not one way to treat it. I think it's up to the individual. Similar to non-league, you've got some guys that are there for the money at the weekend, for the beers after, and you've got some guys that step up to the next level. So it goes both ways.
And there's nothing wrong with either or, to be fair. It's just about what that individual player wants and their kind of level of the level they want to rise to be honest with you. But again, if we're heading out, we've had lads who've gone out to America to want to go and play at the highest level. And then kind of they realised over time that actually the level is higher than what they thought it would be. But as a result of it, they've developed other qualities. They're much more confident, they're more outgoing, and then they're kind of building careers in other areas off the back of going out there because they've taken that leap and that step, which is a great thing as well. Whilst they're not going to go and play top level of football, there's other benefits to it. So there's always two sides to the coin, isn't there?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is just being honest with yourself. You know, if you're
Yeah.
someone that is doing the extracurricular activities, you know, you're going to the parties, you're going out late,
Yeah.
you're doing all of that stuff excessively, don't then come and say, oh yeah, I want to take the game to the next level. You know, you gotta be able to find the right balance there and be honest with yourself about what you actually want from the experience, from your playing, and whether that's in the US or whether that's, you know, playing non-league in England.
Yeah. That's a really sound point. There's inputs and there's outputs, and you have to be realistic with your inputs. And if you know you're not necessarily doing the work to take yourself to the level you want to play at, you just have to be open and honest with yourself. And some players can do that really, really well. Some players might struggle with that, but it's the nature of the beast, unfortunately. Final question for you. I've really enjoyed today. If you had a non-league footballer listening right now who wants to get faster, more powerful, and more athletic, what's the one thing that you would want them to understand moving forward?
I always find myself going back to getting those sprints in. You know, I always just think of the lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah.
You're going to go to team training anyway. Like, why can't you do 20 minutes before? You know, it's such an easy habit. You don't have to find an extra day or time to go to the gym. And I think it's a good place to start is before you start looking at your program and saying, what can I add to this? It's how can I get the most out of it? You know, so even if you only got 2 training sessions a week, before I try and add the 3rd training session, am I actually giving 100% in the 2 sessions that I'm doing? Because if you're giving 50% at both sessions, you can almost add another equivalent of 2 training sessions a week of what you would have been doing by just training at 100%. And less training sessions, less work at a better quality is always going to beat more training sessions, more work at a lower quality. So
absolutely,
just say before you start trying to add more and more to what you're already doing, just improve what you're doing. And that doesn't mean to, you know, get stuck in that loop of trying to over optimize everything. Similar to what you said, it's your inputs. What are you putting into that session? How can you improve that? Don't worry so much about what that actual session is. Just give it everything. And then you're really going to get a true representation of the progress you're making, the work that you're getting done. And then where can you go from there, making the most of everything that you're already doing?
Yeah, great answer. You mentioned the low hanging fruit about getting speed exposure. Would you say, because it's something I see a lot with non-league lads, is getting leaner is also another one for a lot of lads, because we know what the UK culture can be like, especially the drinking culture in non-league, and that can lead to a few beer bellies in the non-league game. Is that another one you would say?
Yeah, massively, especially within the non-league system where you're just a better player already just by being fit. And like you said, it's the lowest hanging fruit that you can get. And again, it's not about going in and optimizing every single part of your diet. You know, you don't need to suddenly add 15 different supplements. You don't need to start eating salads for lunch every day. You don't need to never go out for beers after the game with the team. You know, there's obviously you've got to find balance and
absolutely
with everything that you do, but just again, start with your nutrition, just find the lowest hanging fruit of can you get X amount of protein at each meal so that you feel a little bit fuller so it stops you from wanting to eat more afterwards. Can you get, say, 5 servings of fruits and veggies a day? Again, so you feel a little bit fuller so that you don't have that desire to overeat and snack, and just getting something consistent in place that you can stick to, similar with the training. Start, it doesn't have to be perfect, and then you can improve each step as you go from there. But going back to the question, it's such an easy way to make a massive difference.
They're simple things, aren't they? Speed and getting leaner. It's so simple, but a lot of players overcomplicate it, and they really, it's not easy. I won't say it's easy because it takes a lot to be able to do that and to do it properly, but they are very, very simple things. And I think the biggest thing from today that I've kind of is reinforced in my mind is brilliant basics and just doing basic things really, really well and doing it consistently, not having to be perfect. Yeah. I've really enjoyed today.
Yeah, I do want to add quickly before it ends.
Go for it.
The same applies for the gym stuff as well. You know, I feel like we've touched a little bit more on that speed stuff, but even in the gym, it's the same kind of, I like the brilliant basics of like, you know, get your heavy squat in, get your heavy hinge in, get in and out. You're in and out 20 minutes. And you've made a load of progress there, and you can do that consistently rather than trying to cram an hour session into a time where you don't have time. You're already fatigued. You can apply the same to every single aspect and part of your game. And once you have those basics in, then you've got a massive and a great foundation that you can then go build off.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know about you, but I absolutely love those like 20, 30-minute lives. There's nothing better. You're in and out before you even know it. And it's like, you can go and do other things in the day that you enjoy doing, Brilliant.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed today, Archie.
Yeah, it's been great.
Guys, for anyone who wants to follow Archie, if you don't already, I'm sure you already do. Archie, what's your account? Is it at Archie R. Watts?
Yeah, at Archie R. Watts.
Drop my follow.
Watts. I had to drop the R in.
The content is top tier. I've been a big fan of it for a while, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of what's a very, very busy week for you. For those of you that didn't hear, before we started recording, Archie's in his, was it your Masters week? Coming to the end, is it?
Yeah, final week of the Masters programs. Been a busy week, but it's been a nice break and a great conversation to, chat about what I'm passionate about.
No,
yeah, it's been great.
No, fantastic. Keep up the great work. Keep up the great content. And I really appreciate you jumping on. Guys, for anyone who doesn't already, drop him a follow. If you don't follow me already, it's at Coach_Cayman. Please like, share, subscribe somewhere around this podcast. And as always, share it with your teammates, because we're trying to reach as many players as possible to help them to become better athletes. I'll see you guys next time.